Hi, this is National Master Dan Heisman, and we're here with another video to help you improve your chess game. Today we're going to be talking about an issue that we've talked about in previous videos, which is candidate moves. Candidate moves are moves that you're considering or moves that do something. Because candidate moves that are moves that do something, it starts out by asking yourself, what are both sides trying to do? If you understand what both sides are trying to do, your opponent's trying to do what you're trying to do, the candidate moves should flow naturally from that. If your opponent's last move makes a threat, then you say, all right, one of the things I might want to do is meet the threat. If you're trying something offensive, maybe you can do a check, capture, or threat, which will help you do something. So candidate moves are moves that do something. Today we're also going to talk about the idea of an initial versus final candidate moves. What does that mean? Well, an initial candidate move is a move that does something, just like we said. But the number one screen that you want to put it through to see if you should continue is that candidate move safe? I like to tell a little story, which I'll tell right now, which is a few years ago I had a student who was playing a game and he was up a piece with a clearly winning position. He was playing black and he had his king on d8, king on e8, and his queen was on d8 and he needed to castle queenside. So I said to him, I said when we're going over the game, all right, in this position, you need to castle queenside. You're up a piece. Once you castle, you have no problems. The only place your queen can go is to go to e7 to get out of the way so you could castle. But if you play queen e7, then he plays queen b5 check and he wins your bishop. So that's not safe. So your first move should be to move the bishop back so it's guarded by a pawn. And then you can play queen e7 and castle queenside and you win. And he said to me, well, Dan, I went through all the same logic that you did, but I skipped the step of asking whether my move was safe, and I immediately played queen e7, and my opponent played queen b5 check, won my bishop, and I lost the game. So you can't skip that step. It's the most important step, but it's also the same step that we're talking about here in this video of separating initial from final candidate moves. So the number one thing that separates an initial candidate move from a final candidate move is it safe? If it's not safe, then you have two choices. You can either discard it, or you can continue to look at it as a possible sacrifice, or maybe it's initially looks not safe, but if you look deeper, maybe really it is safe. So in which case you try to, what they call, make it work. If you have a move that could, let's say you have a move that completely could win the game, but it doesn't look like it worked, your opponent has a defense, rather than just giving up on it right away, the risk-reward ratio tells you, don't give up on moves that could win the whole game right away. Try to spend a little more time on them and say, maybe I can make this move work. Maybe if I could just sacrifice a piece first or whatever you need to do, maybe that would make it work and then I could win the whole game. So you don't want to give up on a move too quickly if it wins the whole game, but normally if a move is not safe, you're going to give up on it. So a final candidate move is a move that you're considering after you've put them through this initial criteria, like whether they were safe or not. So let's say you would start out with 3, 4, 5, 6 candidate moves, and you might find 1, 2, 3 of them unsafe. That would still leave you with a bunch of 2, 3, 4, maybe final candidate moves that you have to compare and analyze and see whether or not which one you're going to play. Usually you use the process of elimination. If you have 3 candidate moves, you look at them just deep enough so that you can eliminate one of them, and then that leaves 2, and then you just look at those just deep enough to see which one you could prove is better. And then once you have your final move, you spend time on that, making sure it's really as good as you think it is, making sure you're proof that it's the best move, or at least as good as any other move is sound, and so on, and then you finally make it. All right, so I thought I'd take a couple positions as an example, one from an amateur game and one from a recent Grandmaster speed game. So let's look at white in this position. White is equal in material, but notice black has blocked his dark squared bishop out from the king side, and those dark squares around the black king are very attractive for maybe a mating attack. So what would white be trying to do here? Well, he certainly looks like he should be trying to attack king side. Also, look that all black's queen and some of his other pieces are kind of stuck on the queen side, so it's pretty easy for white to play moves like queen to g4 or bishop h6 or something to get his pieces over to the king side where black doesn't have as many defenders. So let's look at some moves that might do something like that. We already mentioned bishop h6 and queen g4. We could play f6 so that if we can get our queen to h6, we can mate him. f6 would also prevent black from doing the defense f6, which would allow him to guard the second rank. So f6 is a good candidate move. Bishop h6 to hit the rook first, and then do something like either play f6, or once the rook's not on the f-file, maybe we could play bishop h6, and then play f takes g6, or maybe reverse that move order, and try to get a hold of the f-file somehow. So we could try to mate him. We could try to get the queen to the dark squares. If we put our queen on c1, that puts the queen on the dark squares, but then the bishop is in the way, and we'd have to somehow play like bishop g5, bishop f6, and then queen h6, and that's maybe not possible. We could play f6 and then play something like bishop a5 to sacrifice the bishop to get it out of the way, and if the queen takes on a5, we could then play queen to c1 to threaten queen to h6 and then mate. The problem with that is it's a little bit slow. If we give up the bishop and then play queen to c1, he could even play something like king h8 and then rook g8. So let's show you what I was talking about. If I play f6, he could just play something like king h8, and if I sack the bishop over here and play queen here, he can just play rook over here, and queen h6 is not threatening mate yet. We'd love to be able to get our rook up and over and be able to sack the queen and then mate him, as in the basic tactics books, but it's not going to happen. But these are the kind of things that you're looking for. So in this position, we have a lot of candidate moves. Now we have to look at whether they're safe. Well, first of all, we have to notice that on b5, we have our knight attacked twice, and it's only guarded once by the pawn on c4. So black's threatening to win a pawn with bishop takes b5. In fact, his last move was bishop d7 for that purpose. If we can mate him, we could just give him that pawn. If our tactics work out, and we could play bishop h6 or queen to g4, and it turns out we have a mating pattern, then we don't really care whether he wins a pawn on b5 or not. But if we're really worried, we could start out by playing knight takes d4 and trade the knight for the bishop. The problem with doing that is it gives him a protected passed pawn. Now, is that a big deal? Not if we have a strong kingside attack, because that pawn's not going anywhere for a long time. But it could help black a lot in the endgame. So it's not like knight takes d4 is a completely, valueless move for black. Giving him that passed pawn could help him in some later lines if our attack doesn't work out. So we could now start viewing moves like queen to g4 or queen to c1 or moves like that as almost being sacrificial, because if we play a move like queen to c1, or let's say we play a move like queen to g4, he can play bishop takes b5, c takes b5, queen takes b5. So we have to view those as somewhat not safe, although there's a really good chance that giving up that pawn on b5 is going to be a reasonable sacrifice. All right, so our initial candidate moves are things like f takes g6, which doesn't look like it's the best move because it gives black a chance to connect his rooks along and maybe trade on the f-file and attack and maybe bring his pieces up to the second rank. Like after f takes g6, he could play either h takes g6 or f takes g6, and then he would have pieces like rook f7, or later bring the queen back and queen d8 to e7, and that would guard those dark squares that right now he has trouble guarding. So f takes g6 is not a bad move, but probably we have better. It makes more sense if we're going to play f takes g6 to maybe play bishop h6 first and get the rook off the file. Then when we play f takes g6, whichever way he takes back, our rook on f1 is very strong, and it's attacking that f7 square, and then maybe the queen can come up later. So bishop h6 or maybe knight takes d4 followed by bishop h6 is possible. The idea of just playing queen to g4 or maybe knight takes d4 followed by queen g4 is certainly interesting, because we can play queen h4 and then maybe bishop g5. The problem with a lot of those lines is maybe once we go queen h4, he can play f6. So we could look at queen g4, and now he could even play f6 right away. And we can't play f takes g6 after queen g4, f6, because that f-pawn is pinned to our queen, so queen g4, f6, f takes g6 loses the game to bishop takes g4. All right, well, I'm not going to sit here and tell you what the best move is. We can let the computer do that, and we can even look at the line. What the whole purpose of this video is to look at initial and final candidate moves. So we have candidate moves. We have bishop h6, we have f takes g6, we have knight takes d4. We have things like queen c1. We could even look at queen to e1, threatening to play bishop to a5. That would put our queen on the dark squares. So if we play queen e1, later we could play either g4 and queen h4 to attack on the king side. But meanwhile, if he does nothing, we can play bishop a5. For instance, let's say we play queen e1 and he plays bishop takes b5 trying to win the pawn. Maybe white can just play bishop a5 immediately and trap the queen, because the queen on b6 can't go to b5 because the bishop's in the way. Black can't counterattack the queen on e1 with bishop c3 or bishop f2, doesn't work. So queen to e1 becomes a strong candidate move too. All right, enough of that. Let's turn on the engine over here. Let's move the screen over a little bit. This is the lead chess screen. There's our top 5 candidate moves. Now notice the value on the top 5. 5.7, 5.6, 4.9, 4.6, 4.3. That means that white is pretty much winning no matter what he does. That any reasonable plan will win. And it says that whichever way you pick is not that critical. Some are certainly better than others, but it's not like it drops off from 5.6 to 0.2 or something like that and you have one move that wins the game. Let's follow a line that he thinks might be the best line. At first he thought knight takes d4 was the best move, but now that he's looking deeper, he likes bishop h6 first. And he likes that idea of playing bishop h6 followed by queen to g4. So let's play out that number 1 line here. Bishop h6. Now notice, in a lot of these lines, black does not move the rook on f8. Even though most people would automatically move the rook on f8, the bishop on h6 is actually more valuable on the board than the rook is on f8. The problem with moving the rook on f8 is that the dark squares are weak and that bishop is a monster. But it's true, giving up the exchange would lose the game, but so would everything else. So let's play a move that a human would play here. Let's see what the best rook f move is. Well, there's no, in the top 5, there is no rook f move. So we'll just do it ourselves. Let's play rook f to e8. And now the engine says we can play queen f3 and getting ready to play f takes g6 and penetrate with the queen with mate. So queen f3. He's getting desperate. He's even looking at moves like g5 and bishop takes f5. Let's play, I don't know, queen to d8. F takes g6 to open up that line now that the rook's not there. Let's say black says, okay, I can't take back because it's mate on f7, so I'll play f5. Engine says you could just take it or play queen h5, guarding your g-pawn either way. Let's play queen h5. Queen f6, trying to get the queen into the defensive area. E takes f5. This is, I talk about this when we had the earlier video called Play What If Games with the Engine, where you say, like, what's a good way to conduct this kingside attack? And the engine will try to show you, here's some good patterns. And we're already seeing that white's up 11 pawns here. I guess we don't have to go on. What was the other top candidate moves? We saw that bishop h6 was number 1. Number 2 was to play h4. Well, we roughly talked about moving those pawns up to attack, but we didn't really seriously consider to play h4 or g4 as one of our top candidates. But the engine says h4 is the second best move, and it's almost as good as bishop h6. Now it says that f takes g6 is okay, third best move. And now which way would he take? At first it looks like he should take with the f-pawn. The problem with taking with the f-pawn is that white has a move here that really would do things. He could play bishop h6, and no matter how black plays it, he's going to have to give up the f-file. For instance, if he just plays a move like rook f7, then white will just trade it off, grab the square with check. He can't go toward the middle because the bishop's coming in. let's say he plays king g8, then we just threaten mate in 1, and there's no defense. He could sack his bishop to make it mate in 2. All right, so after bishop h6, if he plays rook takes f1, then white can play queen takes f1 with the same kind of threats. So now white has the f-file, and he's threatening queen f6. If black plays queen to d8, then the d-pawn is hanging. After knight takes, it not only wins the pawn, but it threatens to bring the queen in again. If the queen comes over here and attacks the knight, the engine says, okay, well, I'm going to let you take that knight. He was going to play queen f3. Now he's saying knight takes b7, which is more of a basic move. But let's play queen f3 for the fun of it. If he takes the knight, we play rook f1, threatening queen f7 and then queen g7 mate. If he brings the queen over to try to stop it, we say, yes, that's a nice square for your queen. And we deflect the queen off of that square. And he doesn't really have any moves. For instance, if he plays queen e6, we just sacrifice our queen for a basic checkmate with the rook and the bishop. Okay, back to our initial position. So f takes g6 followed by bishop h6 would also win. a4 to just guard the knight a second time. The engine says you're winning by so much on the king side that you could even stop and guard your pawn on the queen side. The other move, which we talked about at some length, knight takes d4, followed by playing moves on the king side. It says knight takes d4, c takes d4, bishop, let's see, what move does he want to play? He's leaning toward bishop g5 or f takes g6. Every time I let him think for another ply, he's changing his mind. Bishop g5. All right, let's take a look at that. Let's say he plays f6. A lot of humans would do that. Now the engine says sacrifice your bishop with f takes g6. If you say I could never do that, he just takes my bishop and wins. Queen here threatens mate, so he can't play rook f7 and stop the mate. He can't move the king and stop the mate. So he has to take the pawn, and that gives you time to get your queen in with check. And when he goes there, you bring the rook in, and now you're threatening to play like queen h6 and then rook g6 or queen h5 followed by queen takes g5 and then rook over, and you get the rook and the queen in. So he has to take the rook so that you don't do stuff like that. Let's say he tries to go here, you check, he comes up, and now you could take the bishop and go back in material, but you don't need to do that. You have a mating attack. You can play rook here followed by rook f6, and there's no defense. He has to play queen d8 and sacrifice his queen. If instead he played king h8, same kind of thing. Queen here, check, king moves somewhere, and then rook comes into the game, and you can't neutralize that because if you play rook f8, queen takes g5 check, removes the guard on the rook on f8, and it's going to be mate in 3. So again, patterns, patterns, patterns. The more you play these things out and you see these patterns, the more likely you can find similar things in the future. You let the engine or a good player show you these patterns so that you can start to build up your repertoire of what kind of moves make sense. All right, let's go to a completely different position. Let me pause this and I'll bring up the other position. All right, this is from this morning's speed chess game between MVL, Maxime Vachier-Lagrave, everybody knows him as MVL, and the young Indian Grandmaster Gukesh, who has been the first one, I think, to bypass Anand as the top Indian, highest rated FIDE Indian Grandmaster. The rating you're seeing here, I think, is his speed rating. For slow chess, he passed Anand a few months ago and became the first Indian in whatever it was, 35 years to pass Anand as the highest rated player from India. All right, so let's take a look at their position here. First, we'll do a quick count. White has 6 pawns to black's 4, but black has an extra bishop. So black's up a bishop for 2 pawns. So remember we said for initial candidate moves, we're trying to find what both sides are trying to do, and then we're going to come up with candidate moves. Well, black could consolidate. He could If he could just continue to trade things off and go into an endgame where he has a bishop for 2 pawns, that should be enough to win the game. So consolidation is one of his main things. What is White trying to do? Well, White's last move, rook to d4, attacks the pawn on c4. If he could get that pawn on c4, he then would have 3 pawns for the piece. Well, 3 pawns for the piece by Reinfeld count is usually plenty, but in a real game, 3 pawns is usually not enough unless it's late in the game. So here it's in the middle of the game. Probably if White just wins that pawn on c4 and Black can just get rid of all of White's threats, that Black would still be better, but it wouldn't be an easy win, certainly with 3 pawns for the piece anymore. So White's trying to win that pawn. Well, what does that tell us about what Black could be trying to do? Well, one of the things that Black could be trying to do then is to try to save that pawn. So a move that would save the pawn on c4 could be a candidate move. Now we'll look a little deeper and we'll see White's move rook d4 doesn't just threaten rook takes c4. It threatens rook h4 followed by queen to h8 checkmate. Now you might look at that and say, all right, but if he plays rook h4, I can always play knight h5 and block the rook and the queen and there's no checkmate. But again, we have to look a little further and we could say, but what if White just plays g4 and does an AWL? If you haven't seen my earlier video on AWL, it's a really important video. It means attack with something worth less. And when you play rook h4, knight h5, g4, the g-pawn's attacking the knight on h5. The knight can't move because wherever he goes, g7, f6, or whatever is mate. If he plays knight f4 check, White just takes it with the e-pawn. And if he moves, then queen h8 is mate. And if he stays there, then White will take the knight, and then White will be ahead in material. So there is a pretty big threat of rook h4, and then knight h5 is not going to do the job. Now, these guys are playing a super blitz game, so we're going to take more time on this move than they actually could have or would have. But then again, Grandmasters see an awful lot in a few seconds compared to what average players might see in a few minutes. So what kind of candidate moves could Black have? Well, he could just give him the pawn on c4 and get rid of the threats. He could play a move like queen to f8. The idea there is if White wants to win that pawn on c4, he has to start by trading queens, because if he brings his queen back, then that gives Black time to play something like rook c8 and guard the pawn on c4. Although, I guess after queen f8, queen h4, the queen and the rook on d4, the white queen and the white rook, are attacking the pawn twice, and Black can only guard it once. So after queen f8, queen h4, White's probably still winning the pawn. Although if White wants to have 3 pawns for the queen, White might want to trade queens and go into an endgame with 3 pawns against the piece rather than being in a middle game with 3 pawns against the piece. So after queen f8, whether White plays queen takes f8 and then recapture on f8 and then rook takes c4, or whether White plays queen h4, it looks like White might be able to win that pawn. What else could Black do? He could guard the pawn immediately. He could play queen to e6, or queen to c7, or rook to c8. But then we have those same problems we talked about with rook h4, knight h5, g4. Now, could we take advantage of that in any of those lines? Would moving the queen to c7, for instance, give us something on that h2 to b8 diagonal that would mean that rook to h4 wouldn't be dangerous? I don't really see anything. So those kind of just guard the c-pawn moves don't look very good right at the moment. I might be missing something. How about pinning that knight on f3 and trying to counterattack? We could play queen to b7, and then White has 2 good moves. He could play rook takes c4, or he could play rook h4, and either way, I don't see any way to continue to attack f3. I could attack f3 with my rook, with maybe rook e5 and then rook f5. He can't, after rook e5, he can't play knight takes e5 because his knight's pinned. But the problem is his threats after rook h4 are much bigger than my threats to take 3 moves and attack the knight. So it looks like queen b7, rook h4, knight h5, g4 is too slow. I don't think I'm going to be able to win that knight. I mean, maybe if I spend more time, I could try to make it work, but it looks unpromising at the moment, and we don't want to make the video too long. We're only trying to talk about the whole idea that we have initial candidate moves and we have final candidate moves. Well, here it looks like most of black's final candidate moves are probably going to give that pawn back and end up with a bishop against 3 pawns. And he just has to make sure that rook h4 doesn't win the game for white. Let's play out the rest of the game real quick and see what happened. We'll even come down here a little bit. So you can see the evaluation bar now. Oops, didn't want to come down that far. We just want to come down far enough so you could see the top of the board and see the evaluation. So it says black is winning. Black plays queen f8. It says that's a blunder. It says what you should have done is play knight to e4. So knight to e4 would have blocked the rook. It would have given up the c-pawn, but knight to e4 was the best winning move by far. Second was bishop to e5. All right, so knight e4. He played queen f8, queen takes, bishop takes, rook takes c4. Says black is slightly better. Rook goes to the open file, knight d4, rook d5. They're all playing these moves pretty instantly. This is a super blitz game. Maybe, I forget, I think this might be in their 1 minute with 1 second increment game. So everything is being done pretty, it's actually being played even faster than I'm clicking the button here. Which of course means that even though white has 3 pawns for the piece, either side could really win because of the speed of the game. Rook hits the bishop, but the bishop is guarded. White gets a passed pawn. Computer says that black is better. Tries to bring the king to the middle, and he plays there, and the engine says, oh, no, white was better. Now it says white's winning. That pawn is starting to run. Black says, uh-oh. Pins that knight, threatening to get a queen. Oh, he's also threatening to play rook takes knight. So he has a double threat. He's threatening the queen and threatening to take the knight, and black has no defense, and black resigns. So white ended up winning the game. All right, so today was initial and final candidate moves. We didn't want to spend a lot of time in either position, trying to find the best move. We're trying to tell you more about the process of what does it take to identify initial candidate moves, hone them down to some set of final candidate moves, and then process of elimination, try to pick the one that you like the best. All right, hopefully you liked today's video. You can like it, you can subscribe. But the best thing you can do, as I always say at the end of my videos, is please tell your friends about my channel here on YouTube, Dan Heisman Chess. If every single person watching this video told one person and 20% of them actually tried it out, it would be amazing how much the channel would grow that quickly. I always get comments like, it's amazing your videos are so good and you get like 1/1000th as many views as some of these other guys do. And I say, well, I do the best I can at trying to advertise it, but you can take the horse to water, but you can't make him drink. All right, talk to you next time. Thanks a lot. Hopefully you'll be able to help. Bye.